As you can see in this room, I've already hung the drywall on the ceilings. The drywall was hung before we insulated the walls and before I even brought the drywall in for the rest of the job. And the reason is I was blowing in insulation in the ceiling. So we hung the drywall first, then blew in our insulation. Now when I started hanging this ceiling, I started against the longest wall and the straightest wall. But because no wall is ever perfectly straight, I actually measured out from the wall on each end 48 1/4, snapped the line, and when I hung this first run, I actually put the drywall to that line. So that way, every time I moved along on this ceiling, each subsequent row of drywall stayed straight. If this first row would start out crooked, that would actually been compounded by the time we got to the other end of the room. So starting straight is really important. First piece was right here. We started in this corner. First piece is a 12-footer and finished it up with probably like an 11-foot piece. The second row, because this room is approximately 24 feet long, if I started with a 12 from that end, the seam would have ended up in the same place. So I actually started with like an 8-foot sheet and filled it in with a 12 and then finished it off. So the first run has one butted seam, the second run has two, but I did that to avoid having my butted seams line up. In this room, we have a pretty big ceiling, and the customer's expectations are very high. So we want to do whatever we can to make it a perfect ceiling. The biggest problem we're going to have is hiding the seams on this ceiling. And the more difficult to hide seams are your butted seams. So what I've done on every butted seam is I've actually floated it. So here's the ceiling joist here, here's the ceiling joist here. This seam is in between the two joists. Above that I have what is called a back blocker. It's a piece of MDF board that's specially designed for back blocking. So when I attach the drywall to that, it actually pulls it up slightly. So instead of having a butted seam that is a bump that I'm trying to hide, it's actually recessed very similar to your beveled edge seams on a ceiling. So it's going to be much easier for me to meet my customers' expectations. I rarely hang a ceiling where I'm not using a drywall lift, simply because it's much easier. And quite often when you're going to hang a piece of drywall and you're not using a lift, you're standing on a bench and you're balancing on that bench and you're hoping that you get it in the exact right spot against the sheet, against the wall, and then you fasten it, get down off that bench, and it's wrong. But when you use a drywall lift, you crank it up to the ceiling and you can stand back and look at it and make little adjustments. So a drywall lift not only easier, but I think you end up with a better quality hanging job. Most of them just have a hand winch that you winch it up to the ceiling. They're mobile, they have wheels on them so you can move it from side to side. So might as well take advantage of it, especially when you get these heavy sheets. It's just easier. Once the drywall is lifted into place, especially when I'm using a lift, the only place I can really fasten it is along the perimeter. And then once the lift is out of the way, I go ahead and fasten the center. On this particular ceiling, I actually put 4 screws into the face. Typically, 12 inches on center is plenty. That's all you really need. But because I put about 15 to 16 inches of cellulose in this attic, I put an extra screw in there just for my own protection. When you're fastening the drywall, make sure you don't put a fastener too close to an electrical box, because don't forget, you have to cut that out, and because it actually protrudes down to be flush with the ceiling, putting a fastener too close puts too much pressure against it. Then when you router it out, it busts out. The important thing for me is accurate cuts on all these electrical boxes, because every time I cut one wrong, I actually have maybe a 5 to 10 minute repair to do, because each repair takes 3 coats to finish. So taking your time is interesting. When I first got a router, I was making a lot of mistakes. And the reason was, I was thinking, oh, I have a router. I'm going to just do this as fast as possible. But there's no reason to be in a hurry. The important thing is to do a quality job. Take your time. When you router, you go in a counterclockwise direction around the outside of the box.